In the dim glow of a Manhattan penthouse overlooking the glittering Hudson River, Alexander Harrington stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting the crisp white cufflinks that had been passed down from his grandfather. At 42, he was the unchallenged king of New York's real estate empire, a man whose name evoked marble lobbies and skyline-defining towers. His reflection stared back sharp jawline-piercing blue eyes, framed by silver-flecked temples and a tailored tuxedo that cost more than most people's yearly rent. Today was his wedding day, and yet, as he straightened his tie, a bitter resolve hardened in his chest. "This ends before it begins," he thought. Sign the papers, seal the merger, and file for divorce by dawn. She'll get her payout, and I'll get my freedom. The bride, Jasmine Ellis, a woman he'd never truly met, was nothing more than a contractual footnote, a plain, unattractive necessity thrust upon him by his father's dying wish to unite the Harrington fortune with her family's struggling Harlem-based publishing house. Whispers from his inner circle had painted her as dowdy unworthy, a black woman, from the wrong side of the tracks, her dark skin and unremarkable features, a punchline at private clubs in the Hamptons. Alexander had nodded along, steeling himself for the farce. Love. That was for dreamers, not dynasties. But as he slipped on his father's antique gold watch, a sudden chill gripped him. This wasn't just business. It was a cage disguised as vows. And in that moment, as the autumn wind rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows, he wondered if even his ironclad plan could withstand the unknown. Down in the shadowed underbelly of the city where brownstones whispered stories of jazz legends and civil rights marches, Jasmine Ellis sat at her vanity in a modest Brooklyn walk-up. At 38, she carried the weight of generations in her warm brown eyes and the graceful curve of her shoulders broad, from years of lifting, not just books, but dreams deferred. Her gown, a simple ivory silk number she'd sewn herself from thrift store remnants, hugged her curves like a quiet rebellion against extravagance. No diamonds, no heirloom veil, just a single strand of pearls from her late mother's jewelry box, cool against her collarbone. Jasmine's hands trembled as she clasped a bouquet of white calla lilies, their elegant stems hiding a worn leather sketchbook, the one constant companion through her life's quiet storms. She was no stranger to sacrifice. Her family's publishing imprint, Ellis Echoes, had chronicled Black voices since the 1960s, from Baldwin's Fire to Baldwin-inspired poets today. But debts had piled up like unread manuscripts, and her ailing father's plea had sealed her fate: marry Alexander Harrington, to save it all. "It's not forever, baby girl," he'd rasped from his hospital bed in Mount Sinai. "Just long enough to keep the lights on." Jasmine had agreed not for glamour or gain, but for the legacy etched in her veins, the unyielding belief that stories like souls deserved to be heard. Yet as she pinned a delicate lace veil over her face, not to hide flaws, but to shield a heart still raw from old wounds, her fingers brushed an antique silver ring on her right hand. It was simple, etched with faded vines, a relic from a love she'd buried a decade ago. Twist. That ring wasn't just jewelry. It was a vow unbroken, slipped onto her finger by a man who'd promised forever before fate snatched him away in a Harlem street protest gone wrong. Alexander knew none of this. No one did. But as Jasmine rose, her reflection in the cracked mirror caught the light, just so revealing not the ugly specter of rumors, but a woman whose quiet beauty lay in the fire of her spirit, a radiant ebony glow that could outshine any spotlight. She whispered to the empty room, "One step at a time, Jazz. Dignity first. Love. Maybe later." Little did she know that Ring's secret gleam would soon unravel everything Alexander thought he knew about fate, fortune, and the fragile art of falling. The limousine glided through the amber haze of Central Park West, leaves crunching like forgotten promises under its tires. Alexander arrived first at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the Gothic spires piercing the overcast sky like accusatory fingers. Guests milled about the steps, silver-haired socialites in Chanel suits, Wall Street wolves with Rolexes glinting like fangs, their murmurs a low hum of anticipation laced with cruelty. "Heard she's from the projects, Papisa." One dowager confided to her companion, a former debutante whose pearls strained against a Botox-smooth neck. "Plain as pudding, they say." Poor Alexander trapped in a merger with mediocrity. Laughter tinkled like ice in crystal glasses. Alexander ignored them, his polished loafers echoing on the stone as he took his place at the altar. The organ swelled a somber hymn that matched the knot in his gut. 30 minutes he counted. Vows photos escape. But when the massive oak doors creaked open, admitting a figure swathed in soft light, something shifted. Jasmine Ellis stepped forward, her pace-measured veil casting ethereal shadows over her form. The crowd leaned in, breaths held ready for the spectacle of mismatch. Whispers sharpened. "Look at that gown, handmade, no doubt. Charity case if I ever saw one." And the veil hiding something darling. Alexander's gaze locked on her clinical, at first searching for the flaws foretold. She was taller than he'd imagined, her posture regal, like a queen reclaiming her throne. As she drew nearer, her bouquet trembled slightly, not from nerves he mistook, but from the chill. Up close, through the translucent lace, he caught a glimpse, full lips curved in quiet resolve, high cheekbones that spoke of ancestral pride, and eyes. Oh, those eyes like polished onyx, holding depths he couldn't fathom. But it was her hand extending the bouquet toward the priest that snagged his breath. There, winking defiantly on her finger, was that ring. Not a diamond's flash, but silver worn smooth by time and touch, engraved with what looked like intertwined initials. J.E. His mind raced. Who was E? And why did it twist like a knife in his chest? For a man who'd built walls of steel and glass, this tiny band felt like a breach, a portal to a story he hadn't been invited to. Was it a lover's token, a widow's anchor, or something more dangerous? A reminder that hearts once claimed didn't yield easily to contracts. The ceremony unfolded in a haze of incense and stained glass rainbows, vows exchanged like business clauses. In sickness and in health. Jasmine intoned her voice, a melody of southern roots, softened by Brooklyn grit, clear, unwavering rapping around the vaulted arches like smoke from a hearth fire. Alexander repeated his lines mechanically, but his eyes betrayed him, flicking to that ring again and again. The priest's blessing washed over them, and as they turned to face the pews, applause erupted, polite, obligatory undercut by sidelong glances. Outside, paparazzi flashes erupted like fireworks gone wrong, reporters shouting, "Mr. Harrington, is this the merger of the century, or a mistake?" Jasmine's hand slipped into his, for the obligatory pose, her skin warm against his cool palm, and for the first time he felt it, not resentment, but a spark. Curiosity, pity, or the faint forbidden pull of possibility. As the limo whisked them toward the Harrington estate on the Upper East Side, a sprawling limestone behemoth guarding secrets of old money silence cocooned them. Jasmine stared out at the blurring canyons of Fifth Avenue, her veil now lifted to reveal the full truth of her face. Not ugly, but strikingly alive, with a natural elegance that needed no filter or fortune. Freckles dusted her nose, like stars on a midnight sky, and her smile, when it flickered, promised stories untold. Alexander stole glances, the ring burning in his periphery. Who was he? He almost asked, the words dying on his tongue. Instead, he cleared his throat. The reception will be brief. She turned her gaze steady, appraising. Brevity suits some unions, Mr. Harrington. But life, it has a way of lingering. Her words hung laced with a wisdom that pierced his armor, the kind only women who'd weathered storms could wield. In the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers wept light over tables groaning with caviar and vintage Krug. But the air crackled with undercurrents. Toasts rang out to alliances that build empires. Yet eyes lingered on Jasmine, dissecting her every move, the way she navigated the crowd with unhurried grace, greeting staff by name, her laughter a low, genuine ripple when a waiter shared a tale of his granddaughter's first steps. Alexander watched from afar, nursing scotch, the ring's mystery gnawing. She doesn't belong here, the old script in his head insisted. But as she accepted a dance from an elderly uncle, her steps' fluid veil, discarded like a shed-skin doubt, crept in. Who was this woman really? Not the caricature, surely. And that ring, it whispered of losses he'd never mourned, of loves that defied ledgers. As the evening waned, Jasmine slipped onto a balcony overlooking the East River, the city lights a constellation of what-ifs. She opened her sketchbook pencil, whispering across the page. A quick study of the cathedral doors cracked open to let in defiant light. Alexander found her there, drawn by an invisible thread. "You draw," he said, not a question. She closed the book softly. "I see. And tonight I saw a man who thinks he's buying time, but time has other plans." He stepped closer, the ring catching moonlight. "That on your finger. It's not from today." Her eyes softened, not with pity, but shared solitude, the look of someone who'd loved deeply and lost without fanfare. "No, it's from yesterday's tomorrows, a promise kept even in absence." She paused, then added gently, "We all carry ghosts, Alexander. The question is, will yours let you see the living?" In that suspended breath, as fog rolled in from the water, Alexander felt the first fracture in his resolve. Not lust, not strategy, but a quiet ache, the echo of a heart long silenced. Jasmine, with her unyielding grace, had slipped past his defenses, her story a mirror to his own buried longings. For women like her, and perhaps in quieter moments like the ones listening now, who've danced through decades of quiet battles. This was no fairy tale's start. It was the raw, redemptive truth. Love doesn't arrive announced. It arrives veiled in silver rings and stolen glances, waiting for us to lift the shroud. And dear listener, as the night deepens and you settle into your favorite chair, with a cup of chamomile steaming beside you, pause for just a moment. Think of that one ring, that one glance, that one what if from your own tapestry of years. What secrets has your heart kept waiting for the right light to reveal them? Share it softly with a friend tomorrow, or let it warm you like an old letter found in a drawer. Because in stories like Jasmine's and yours, love isn't about perfection. It's about the courage to see, truly see, and let the light in. Until next time, hold that dignity close. It's the most beautiful twist of all. The balcony air hung heavy with the scent of river mist and distant rain, a veil as thin as Jasmine's own, softening the edges of the city below. Alexander lingered a moment longer than he intended, his fingers brushing the cool iron railing. The weight of her words settling like dew on his skin. A promise kept even in absence. Her voice had carried the cadence of old jazz records, smooth, unhurried, laced with a sorrow that didn't beg for pity, but simply was. He wanted to press further to unravel the initials etched into that silver band, like a code from another life. But the swell of laughter from the ballroom pulled him back. Duty called, as it always did, a siren's song of crystal clinks and murmured alliances. Jasmine turned first, her silhouette graceful against the glow of the French doors, and slipped inside without a backward glance. Alexander followed the threshold, marking not just a return to the fray, but the first invisible thread, tugging at the hem of his resolve. The Harrington Estates Grand Ballroom was a cathedral of excess, its walls paneled in mahogany that whispered of boardrooms and broken treaties, chandeliers dripping prisms like tears frozen mid-fall. Tables groaned under silver domes of foie gras and heirloom caviar, each course a testament to fortunes built on steel and speculation. The guests, 80 souls hand-picked from the Rolodex of Manhattan's elite, moved like shadows in couture, their gowns rustling like secrets half-told. Silver-haired matrons with diamonds at their throats clustered near the grand piano where a lone cellist drew out Puccini's O mio babbino caro, the melody a poignant counterpoint to the undercurrent of judgment rippling through the room. Eyes flicked toward Jasmine as she re-entered her simple gown, a stark contrast to the sea of taffeta and tulle, her dark skin glowing under the lights like polished teak in a room full of guilt. She navigated it all with the quiet poise of someone who'd long ago learned to carry storms within. A waiter, a young man named Carlos with calloused hands and a faint accent from the Dominican Republic, approached with a flute of champagne. "Senora Harrington," he murmured, his voice low enough for only her ears. "You look like the queens in my abuela's stories, strong, unbowed." Jasmine's smile was genuine, a bloom in the chill as she touched his arm lightly. "And you, Carlos, are the storyteller keeping those queens alive. Tell me, how's little Sophia's ballet recital coming along?" His face lit up, words tumbling out about pirouettes and pink tutus, a brief oasis amid the opulence. Alexander watched from across the room, glass in hand, the scene unfolding like a painting he'd overlooked in his own gallery. Who was this woman trading whispers of encouragement with the help, while the elite preened? It stirred something unfamiliar, a flicker of warmth quickly doused by the scotch burning his throat. But the whispers found her soon enough, slithering through the crowd like smoke from a poorly tended fire. Victoria Lang Alexander's ex, a vision in emerald silk that clung like envy, made fabric held court near the dessert table, her laughter a chime too sharp. Flanked by two society widows, relics of debutante balls and junior league luncheons, she tilted her head toward Jasmine, voice pitched just high enough to carry. "Darling, that gown hand-stitched, was it? Such thrift in these times of want. And the veil, a clever touch hiding the rustic charms beneath." The widows tittered, one dabbing at her lips with a napkin monogrammed in gold. "One does wonder." The other chimed, her pearls clicking like disapproving teeth. "If it's the merger or the mystery that's truly binding young Alexander. A black bride from Brooklyn. How quaint, like pairing vintage Bordeaux with takeout." Jasmine paused, mid-conversation with a florist who'd arranged the centerpieces, roses, the color of faded blush, imported from Ecuador, her back to the trio, but her ears attuned to every syllable. The words landed not as blows, but as embers, singeing the edges of her carefully tended dignity. She remembered her mother's lessons in the cramped kitchen of their Harlem brownstone, flour-dusted hands, kneading dough for cornbread. "Child, let their tongues wag. Yours holds the real power. Speak kindness and watch it echo." Straightening, Jasmine turned flute in hand and approached the group with the measured grace of a diplomat entering a minefield. "Ladies," she said, her tone warm as sun-warmed linen. "Your gown, Victoria, that green suits you, like envy suits the bold. And those pearls, they must have stories passed down like heirlooms of heartache and triumph." It was no retort, but a mirror held gently reflecting back their barbs without a trace of venom. Victoria's smile faltered a crack in porcelain as the widows exchanged uneasy glances. Jasmine excused herself with a nod, gliding toward the edge of the dance floor, where the cellist's notes wove a fragile spell. Alexander had seen it all his vantage from the shadowed alcove near the bar, affording him the detachment of a general surveying the field. Part of him, the armored part forged in boardrooms where weakness was excised, like a tumor, urged him to stay put, to let the evening's currents carry her as they would. She's resilient. He rationalized a temporary fixture in a temporary farce. Yet another part, buried deeper than he'd admit, recoiled at his inaction. That ring on her finger mocked him now, a silver sentinel, guarding depths he hadn't earned the right to plumb. Who was the E that had claimed her heart? First, a poet, a protester, someone who'd seen her light before the world dimmed it with doubt. The questions coiled in his chest, tightening as the MC announced the first dance, a tradition as rigid as the estate's foundation. The spotlight found them like an unwelcome guest, bathing the polished oak floor in amber. Alexander extended his hand formal as a contract signing, and Jasmine placed hers in it, her palm soft, yet steady, calloused faintly from pencil grips and garden trowels. The cellist shifted to a waltz, Strauss's Blue Danube unfurling like a river at dusk, and they moved into the center bodies, close but souls still charting separate orbits. Her scent enveloped him. Jasmine oil and fresh ink, a whisper of creativity amid the cloying perfumes of the room. "You dance like you've led cotillions." He ventured the words, a bridge over the silence. She met his gaze, her eyes holding the depth of twilight lakes. "My father taught me, said rhythm was rebellion, a way to move through walls unseen. Yours." He hesitated, the truth slipping out unbidden. "My mother," before the empire swallowed her smiles. She called it the art of holding space for yourself and for who might join you there. The admission hung between them, fragile as spun glass, and for a measure their steps synced not as strangers, but as echoes of losses shared. The song ended too soon, applause scattering like leaves in a gust, and they parted with polite murmurs. But as Jasmine melted back into the crowd, now chatting with an elderly aunt who'd lost her husband to the same quiet thief that claimed Jasmine's E, Alexander retreated to the library adjoining the ballroom, a sanctuary of leather-bound volumes and flickering firelight. He poured another scotch, the amber liquid, catching the flames like captured sunsets, and sank into a wing-back chair, worn smooth by generations of quiet confessions. The evening replayed in his mind, her kindness to Carlos, the deft parry of Victoria's barbs, the warmth of her hand in his during that dance. Not ugly, he conceded silently, not plain. Radiant in a way that defies spotlights. And that ring, God, that ring. It wasn't just a relic. It was a compass pointing to a woman who'd loved fiercely enough to wear grief like grace. Hours later, as the last guests drifted into the night, their limos purring down Park Avenue, like contented beasts, Alexander climbed the marble stairs to the master suite. The house settled around him, creaks and sighs, like an old friend recounting tales. He paused at the door to what would nominally be their room, a vast expanse of silk drapes and four-poster elegance, but found it ajar, a sliver of lamplight spilling into the hall. Inside, Jasmine sat at a writing desk by the window, her back to him. sketchbook open under the glow of a single brass lamp. Her pencil moved in fluid arcs, capturing not the ballroom's grandeur, but something intimate, the curve of a hand extended in dance fingers intertwined with an invisible partner. Was it him, or the ghost of E? She didn't turn, but her shoulders tensed, slightly aware of his presence, like a deer sensing the wind's shift. He stepped back, unspoken words retreating with him. In his own room down the hall, a austere chamber of slate grays and minimalist lines, he lay awake, long after the clock struck 2, staring at the coffered ceiling, where shadows danced like unspoken vows. The city hummed beyond the windows, a lullaby of ambition and ache, but his thoughts circled her. The woman who'd entered his world, veiled in rumor, only to unveil layers of quiet fire. For the first time in years, Alexander Harrington felt not the chill of isolation, but the tentative thaw of connection. A love story not yet written, but sketched in silver and ink, waiting for dawn to reveal its next line. Dawn crept into the Harrington estate like a hesitant visitor, its pale fingers tracing the frost-laced windows of the master wing. It was the 3rd morning since the wedding, a date marked not on calendars, but in the subtle shifts of silence that now defined their shared exile. Jasmine awoke to the murmur of the East River below the water's ceaseless lap, a reminder of boundaries both seen and unseen. She slipped from the 4-poster bed, its linens starched to perfection, yet chilled by disuse, and padded barefoot across Persian rugs that muffled her steps like unspoken regrets. The room assigned to her adjoining Alexander's, but separated by a heavy oak door, cracked open only in courtesy, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a well-appointed waiting room. She dressed in a simple cashmere sweater, the color of autumn chestnuts, and wool slacks that whispered against her skin. Practical armor for a day yet to unfold. Downstairs, the breakfast parlor awaited, a vast chamber of sunlit mahogany and silver that gleamed like polished armor. The table stretched long enough for a dozen intimates, set with Wedgwood porcelain and crystal that caught the light in mocking prisms. Jasmine settled into her chair at one end, the leather creaking softly under her, and unfolded the morning's New York Times, its pages crisp with ink and indifference. The coffee arrived steaming black as midnight rivers poured by. Elena, the housekeeper, whose silver-streaked bun held stories of Ellis Island crossings and Ellis Avenue tenements. "Buenos dias, señora," Elena murmured, her eyes crinkling with a warmth that bypassed formalities. The chef made pan de muerto, a little taste of home for the new season. Jasmine's fingers brushed Elena's as she accepted the plate, the pastry's anise-scented crumb, a bridge across oceans. "You spoil me, Elena. Tell me, did Rose's knee hold up after yesterday's shopping?" The conversation flowed like honey, Elena's tales of her daughter's budding nursing career at Bellevue, weaving a fragile tapestry of connection in the room's echoing void. Alexander descended precisely at 7:15, as the grandfather clock in the hall told its metronomic judgment. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored to the breadth of his shoulders like a second skin tie, knotted in a Windsor that spoke of boardrooms yet to conquer. He carried the scent of bergamot cologne and fresh newsprint, his phone already vibrating with the urgency of empires in motion. A nod to Jasmine, polite as a diplomatic missive. "Morning." She mirrored it, her voice a gentle counterpoint. "Good morning, Alexander. The river's calm today, looks like it might hold." He paused fork midway to a poached egg, the words lingering like mist on glass. What did she mean by hold the weather? Their fragile truce. But the trill of an incoming call from his COO in Dubai pulled him under, and he retreated to the sunroom with murmured apologies, his back a wall of broadcloth and buried questions. The days blurred into a rhythm as predictable as the tide's ebb. their lives parallel lines etched in the estate's marble veins, close enough to sense the other's warmth, yet never converging. Alexander vanished into the city before the dew burned off the lawns, his chauffeured Escalade slicing through midtown traffic to the glass eyrie of Harrington Holdings on Park Avenue. There, amid spreadsheets that mapped Manhattan's skyline and deals that swallowed lesser fortunes, he buried the night's unrest. Jasmine's ring haunted his periphery, during conference calls a silver specter, amid pie charts and projections. E for Elias Everett. He'd resisted the urge to search her name online, a breach too intimate for their arm's-length alliance. Instead, he focused on the merger's fine print, the Ellis Publishing House's ledgers red with debt, but rich in unpublished manuscripts of black poets who'd sung of love's quiet rebellions. One title caught his eye, Veils of Valor, a collection on women who'd mended worlds with thread and tenacity. It stirred an echo faint as a half-remembered hymn. While he wheeled and dealed under fluorescent halos, Jasmine claimed the estate's forgotten corners as her quiet domain. The library, tucked like a jewel in the east wing, became her harbor, a vaulted space of oak shelves groaning under leather spines, from Austen's wry observations to Walker's rooted truths. Sunlight slanted through leaded panes, gilding dust motes that danced like fireflies in twilight. She settled into a wing chair, worn soft by decades of solitary reed sketchbook balanced on her knee pencil, tracing visions that the world outside denied. Not portraits of grandeur, but intimacies. A brownstone stoop in Harlem, where elders swapped recipes for gumbo and grace. A jazz club on 125th, where saxophones wept for lost lovers. A garden plot in Prospect Park soil, turned by hands that knew the weight of harvests, both literal and longed for. Each line was a reclamation ink, flowing from a wellspring of resilience her mother had taught her in Sunday sermons at Abyssinian Baptist. Draw your dreams, baby, even if the canvas is borrowed. Her presence rippled outward, thawing the mansion's frost-kissed edges. Afternoons found her in the conservatory, sleeves rolled to her elbows, alongside Marcus the groundskeeper, whose arthritic knuckles told tales of Carolina tobacco fields migrated north. Together they coaxed life from the ornamental beds, English roses stubborn as old loves their thorns, a reminder that beauty often drew blood. "These blooms need patience, ma'am," Marcus grunted, spade-biting earth. "Like folks, they root deep or wither shallow." Jasmine knelt beside him, her slacks dusted with loam fingers, gentle as she pressed starters into the friable soil. "Then we'll give them both roots and rain." By week's end, the first buds swelled pink as dawn promises, and Marcus gifted her a clipping of lavender from his own windowsill plot in Astoria. "For your sketches," he said, eyes twinkling. "Smells like freedom." The staff noticed the shift. Elena's kitchen hummed with shared recipes. Jasmine's collards simmered alongside Elena's arroz con pollo, while the butler's pantry echoed with laughter over bridge hands dealt on off hours. The estate, once a mausoleum of polished indifference, breathed easier, its halls carrying the faint perfume of possibility. Evenings brought them nearest, yet farthest. Alexander returned as twilight bruised the sky, shedding his coat in the foyer like a skin too tight. Dinners were formal ballets, candlelight flickering over Dover sole and asparagus spears conversation skirting the edges of weather and wine. The merger paperwork advances. He'd offer, fork poised. Jasmine would nod, her responses measured. And the stories within it, do they advance too? The question hung unanswered as he excused himself to the study, its walls papered in contracts that promised security, but whispered solitude. From his desk, through the half-open door, he'd catch glimpses Jasmine, wandering the galleries, pausing before a dour ancestral portrait, her head tilted, as if listening to the subject's unsaid sorrows. Or in the solarium sketchbook aglow under a banker's lamp, her brow furrowed in concentration, lips moving silently as if coaxing secrets from the page. Once he lingered too long, drawn by the scratch of graphite on paper, a sound like rain on tin roofs, evoking childhood summers at his grandmother's Cape Cod cottage, where love was pieced in quilts and quiet confessions. The world beyond the estate's iron gates offered no such mercy. Their inaugural outing as the Harringtons was a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum, where artifacts of empires past mocked the fragility of new ones. Jasmine arrived on Alexander's arm, her gown a midnight blue sheath that draped like midnight rivers, simple yet sculpted to honor the curves time had kindly etched. Heads turned not in admiration, but appraisal, the kind reserved for interlopers in ivory towers. In the Temple of Dender's shadowed glow, Victoria Lang materialized like a specter in scarlet chiffon, her flute of Veuve Clicquot raised in mock salute. "Alexander, darling, you do clean up well. And your companion, such exotic poise. One forgets how diverse mergers can be." The cluster around her blue blood widows with martini olives speared like lances chuckled, the sound brittle as autumn leaves. Jasmine felt the barbs glance off, not piercing but pricking, a reminder of boardrooms where her father's pitches had been dismissed as urban flavor. She lifted her chin, voice steady as a hymn's refrain. "Diversity builds bridges, Victoria, or so the Dender stones suggest. They've stood longer than whispers." Alexander tensed beside her, his hand a fleeting anchor at her elbow. But he said nothing. Pride, a chain too familiar to break. Later in the limo, gliding down Fifth Avenue's canyon of light, the silence thickened like fog off the reservoir. Jasmine gazed at the passing windows, reflections layering her face with city ghosts. "Bridges require two willing architects," she murmured, not accusation, but observation. He shifted the leather seat, sighing. Tonight was obligatory. She turned, then eyes holding the weight of unspoken histories. "As am I." The question lingered unanswered as the estate's gates yawned open like weary jaws. That night, alone in her room, Jasmine opened her sketchbook to a fresh page pencil, hovering before tracing the outline of a bridge spanning not stone, but solitude. Alexander in his study poured a nightcap and stared at the river's black ribbon. The silver ring's enigma, now joined by another, how a woman could warm a house while leaving his heart in winter's grip. The parallel lines of their days, held for now, but even the sturdiest tracks, bent under time's insistent curve. Rain came to Manhattan that evening, like an old friend, bearing grudges unannounced, and unrelenting, turning the city's arteries into shimmering veins of silver. It drummed against the estate's slate roof, with the insistence of a half-forgotten melody, the kind that lingers from youth's rainy afternoons, spent tracing patterns on fogged windows. Jasmine stood at the solarium's arched panes, her silhouette a soft outline against the storm's fury, a half-finished sketch abandoned on the wicker settee beside her. The page held the barest hint of a bridge spanning what she wasn't sure the East River's restless flow, or the chasm she'd sensed widening between her and the man whose name she'd taken, like a borrowed coat, warm in theory, but ill-fitting in practice. 2 weeks into this arranged symphony of silences, and the notes still clashed, his departures crisp as starched collars, her evenings, a quiet vigil in rooms that echoed with the ghosts of grander lives. She'd marked the hour on the mantel clock, its brass hands, ticking past 8, then 9, the storm's growl masking the distant rumble of traffic on the FDR drive. Worry crept in, not as panic, but as a familiar ache, the sort honed from years of waiting for her father's lucid spells in the dim wards of Mount Sinai, for the postman's knock bearing rejection, slips from publishers who'd praised her words, but passed on her skin's shade. Alexander's text had come at dusk. Delayed. Merger talks running long. No apology, no query after her day, just the efficiency of a man who'd learned early that emotions were luxuries, like the vintage ports cellared below, but rarely uncorked. Jasmine smoothed her linen blouse, the fabric cool against her collarbone, where her mother's pearls rested like dormant fireflies, and fetched an umbrella from the vestibule, a sturdy black number, its ribs reinforced against gales that had once uprooted the estate's elms. The crunch of tires on wet gravel announced him before the headlights pierced the gloom twin beams, cutting through sheets of rain like hesitant searchlights. She stepped onto the portico, the overhang shielding her from the deluge umbrella unfurled like a dark wing. Alexander emerged from the escalade, his wool overcoat's sodden hair plastered in dark waves across his forehead, the lines of exhaustion etching deeper furrows around his eyes. He looked not the Titan of towers, but a man diminished by the weight of unseen burdens, deals that dangled like carrots before slipping into the mud. Water streamed from his shoulders as he slammed the door, briefcase clutched like a shield. "Alexander," she called, voice rising just enough to thread the roar, extending the umbrella's shelter. "You'll catch your death out here. Come under." He paused, rivulets tracing paths down his temple, his blue gaze meeting hers through the veil of precipitation, a collision brief as a skipped heartbeat. For an instant the world narrowed, the rain's percussion fading to a hush, the estate's lanterns casting her in a halo of amber warmth. Concern softened her features, not cloying or contrived, but rooted in the quiet empathy of those who'd weathered their own tempests. Widows consoling at church suppers, mothers mending socks by lamplight, while husbands chased horizons. It was the kind of care that didn't demand reciprocity, yet pierced all the same. Alexander's jaw tightened, a reflex born of boardrooms, where vulnerability was a vulnerability exploited. "I'm fine, Jasmine. It's just water." The words came gruff, edged with the day's frustrations, a stalled negotiation with Tokyo investors, echoes of his father's gravelly admonitions. Harringtons don't yield, son. Not to weather, not to whims. He brushed past, shoulder grazing the umbrella's edge, leaving droplets to scatter like unspoken apologies on the stone. Inside the foyer welcomed him with its hush of Persian rugs and polished oak, the scent of beeswax mingling with the ozone tang of his damp clothes. He shed the coat in the butler's pantry, Elena clucking softly as she hung it to dry her eyes, flicking toward the solarium with a knowing glint. Upstairs in the study that served as his fortress, a room of walnut paneling and leather-bound ledgers, he sank into the desk chair, the leather sighing under his frame. Papers blurred before him, merger clauses swimming like fish in a clouded stream. But his mind replayed the portico, her outstretched arm, the umbrella's futile grace. Why bother? He wondered, rubbing his temples. Yet, the gesture lingered a warmth against the chill, seeping from his bones, stirring memories of his mother on stormy Cape Cod eves, her shawl-draped figure at the door, cocoa steaming in mugs for father and son. A ritual of refuge in a world that prized fortitude over feeling. Down the hall, Jasmine busied herself in the alcove kitchenette, a nook Elena had shown her on that first tentative tour. Granite counters, scarred by decades of midnight cravings, a kettle that whistled like a lonesome train. She steeped chamomile with a twist of lemon, the steam curling like tendrils of forgiveness, and carried the tray to his study door. No knock, just a soft placement on the side table, the porcelain clinking faintly against the wood. She retreated before he could notice the rain's rhythm on the panes, a lullaby for her own unrest. In her room, she slipped into a robe of faded flannel, a relic from her Brooklyn days, soft as well-worn confessions, and opened her sketchbook to the bridge's unfinished span. Pencil in hand, she added shadows where light feared to tread, each stroke a meditation on endurance, the arch holding firm, not despite the flood, but because of it. Later, as thunder grumbled its retreat, Alexander rose for a glass of water, the study's shadows lengthening like fingers of doubt. His eyes caught the tray, tea cooling in a bone china cup, a saucer of lemon wedges beside the steam, long dissipated, but the gesture fresh as morning dew. He lifted it, inhaling the herbal calm, and took a sip. It spread through him, not as medicine, but as memory, his grandmother's tisanes after long harvests, brewed with herbs from her Jersey garden, a balm for aches that went bone deep. The tension in his shoulders eased a knot, untying thread by thread, and for the first time since the cathedral's vows, he felt seen not as the Harrington heir, but as a man adrift in his own current. Who does this? For strangers, the question bloomed tender as a bruise, and he set the cup down with care, as if it held not leaves, but the fragile first leaves of something unnamed. The following afternoon brought respite from the skies, if not the undercurrents in the form of a luncheon at the plaza, a confection of gilt and velvet where the elite brokered futures over Dover Sole and Dom Perignon. The merger demanded their presence. Harrington Holdings, unveiling blueprints for a Harlem redevelopment, a nod to the Ellis legacy woven into the deal's fabric. Alexander anticipated the scrutiny, his hand light on Jasmine's elbow, as they entered the Palm Court crystal palms, tinkling overhead like chimes of cautious welcome. She wore a tailored sheath in slate-gray pearls at her throat, her hair coiled in a chignon that spoke of boardroom poise rather than boudoir allure. The table held a phalanx of suits, Japanese execs with inscrutable nods, American venture partners nursing Manhattans, their eyes appraising her as addendum, not asset. Talk turned to the project's cultural anchor, a wing for Ellis Echo's archives galleries, for emerging Black artists. One partner, a silver-thatched financier from Boston, whose cufflinks bore the Harvard crest, leaned forward with a smirk veiled as jest. Charming notion, but let's be frank. Art's a luxury in ledgers. And your bride's touch, quaint, I'm sure. But does Harlem's grit translate to Park Avenue polish? The room's air thinned, a collective inhale, held like breath before a dive. Alexander's fork paused, words forming on his tongue, defensive clipped. But Jasmine interceded, her voice, a river stone, smoothed by time, smooth, unyielding. Grit and polish aren't opposites, Mr. Hargrove. They're the patina of progress. Consider Romare Bearden's collages. Harlem's pulse layered onto cityscapes that now grace the Met. Or Faith Ringgold's quilts weaving stories of struggle into tapestries that command millions at auction. Our wing won't just house books. It'll host dialogues panels on how architecture echoes ancestry, like Saarinen's curves, mirroring the bend of a river spirit. She gestured lightly to the blueprints unfurled, like a map of mended divides, her knowledge unfurling with the grace of a woman who'd curated readings in cramped Brooklyn lofts, debating Baldwin till dawn with neighbors whose dreams deferred had flowered into fire. The table fell into a reverent hush. Hargrove's smirk dissolving into a nod of concession, the Japanese contingent murmuring approvals in rapid syllables. Alexander sat transfixed, the Dover Sole forgotten on his plate, watching as she bridged not just rooms, but realms. Her words a lantern in the fog of figures. As they rose for coffee in the adjoining salon, amid potted palms that rustled like applause, he fell into step beside her. Where does one learn to wield art like a weapon and make it sing? His tone held not mockery, but the quiet awe of a man glimpsing dawn after nights of eclipse. Jasmine turned her gaze steady as the Hudson's flow holding depths he'd only skimmed. From living at Alexander, I read the masters in library corners where the heat barely reached, listened to elders whose stories were their only currency, observed how beauty persists in cracks like ivy, claiming concrete. Dismissal doesn't silence, it sharpens. Her words landed soft as petals, yet rooted deep, echoing the resilience of women who'd raised families through wars and want turning scarcity into symphonies. That evening, as twilight bled into the estate's gardens, Alexander wandered the halls with uncharacteristic idleness, drawn to the library's glow like a moth to embers. The door stood ajar, inviting, and he slipped inside, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and her faint jasmine oil. Her sketchbook lay open on the refectory table, pages splayed like an invitation to confession. Cityscapes where spires intertwined with stoops, portraits of faces, etched with laughter lines and quiet scars, a garden where roses defied frost. At the heart, the bridge now complete its arch, illuminated by a single beam piercing storm clouds, figures on either bank, reaching not quite touching. His chest tightened, a vice of recognition. This was no idle doodle, but a cartography of the soul-mapping longings he'd filed away in vaults of reason. Shame flushed his cheeks for the intrusion, yet he lingered, tracing the lines with a fingertip, as if they might reveal the woman beyond the merger. The next morning dawned, crisp sunlight slanting through the breakfast parlor like a tentative olive branch. Alexander lingered over his espresso, the Wall Street Journal folded beside untouched brioche, his eyes finding hers across the damask cloth. Jasmine. He began the words hovering like steam from his cup. Thank you for last night, for the tea, the umbrella, the insight. But pride, that old sentinel, clamped his jaw. Instead, he managed a softer nod, the silence between them no longer arctic, but laced with the promise of thaw. As she rose to refill her cup, their hands brushed at the sideboard, accidental electric, and in that fleeting contact, he glimpsed not obligation, but the horizon of what might bloom if he dared to cross his own bridge. The Harrington estate slumbered under a canopy of early November stars, their pinpricks faint against the city's ambient glow, as if even the heavens held their breath for the gathering storm. It had been 3 weeks since the rain-swept evening that cracked the ice between them, just enough for tentative rivulets of warmth to trace the edges of their shared silence. Alexander found excuses to linger now, a question about her latest sketch over morning coffee, the faint brush of his fingers against hers when passing the Times across the breakfast linen. Jasmine met these overtures with the measured grace of a woman who'd learned to test waters before diving, her smiles genuine, but guarded like heirloom quilts folded away for winters yet to come. Yet beneath the thawing surface, the estate's halls whispered of fractures unhealed, the merger's ink drying on ledgers that bound their names, but not their nights. The silver ring on her finger, a quiet sentinel against deeper intimacies. The invitation arrived midweek, embossed on cream vellum, thick as whispered confessions, a gala at the estate itself, a homecoming for the newlyweds to toast the Ellis-Harrington alliance before the holiday whirl. Alexander scanned it in the study, the fire's embers casting long shadows across his desk, and felt a prickle of unease, not from the event's pomp, but from the guest list, curling at the edges like smoke. Victoria Lang's name leaped out, scripted in italic flourish, a relic from his pre-merger life, the ex-fiancée, whose beauty had been as sharp as her ambitions. Their engagement, a calculated pas de deux, shattered by his father's edict for a strategic match. He'd buried that chapter under blueprints and balance sheets, but now it resurfaced unbidden like a melody from a half-remembered waltz. Jasmine in the conservatory, where the air hung heavy with the scent of forced hyacinth's purple blooms, defiant against the chill, received the news from Elena over a tray of Darjeeling and ginger snaps. "A grand affair, señora." The housekeeper confided, her apron dusted with flour from the morning's scones. "But mind the thorns on those roses. Some guests bring more than compliments." Jasmine nodded, folding the card into her sketchbook's pages, where it nestled beside a half-drawn portrait of Alexander. His profile caught in lamplight jaw set, but eyes softened by something unspoken. She chose her gown with care, a midnight velvet sheath, its neckline modest as a vicarage collar, hem whispering against her ankles like a lover's secret. No veil this time, just her mother's pearls, luminous against her skin, and that ring, its silver vines, a talisman against the tide. As she fastened the clasp in the vanity's oval mirror, she caught her reflection lines, etched by laughter and loss. The fine crow's feet at her eyes, a map of joys deferred. Dignity is the finest armor, her mother had murmured during those long-ago vigils at her father's bedside, hands clasped over a worn Bible. Wear it like you mean to dance. The ballroom transformed under the hands of florists and fairy lights, chandeliers ablaze with 1,000 candle power, their prisms scattering rainbows across marble floors polished to a mirror sheen. Guests arrived in waves, silver-maned philanthropists from the opera board, their husbands' tuxedos, crisp as autumn frost. Young heiresses in silks that slithered like eels. Politicians with smiles honed on C-SPAN spotlights. The air hummed with strings from a quartet, tucked in the alcove Vivaldi's Four Seasons, the winter movement's bite underscoring the room's undercurrent of appraisal. Jasmine entered on Alexander's arm, his hand a steady anchor at her waist, the warmth of his palm seeping through velvet like sunlight through stained glass. Heads turned, conversations dipping into murmurs, admiration laced with the old poison eyes, tracing her form, not with welcome, but with the curiosity of anthropologists at a dig. They circulated like planets in careful orbit, Alexander fielding toasts to the union that redefines skylines. Jasmine, murmuring insights on the Ellis Archive's hidden gems, a volume of Gwendolyn Brooks's poems that had inspired her own unpublished verses. For a span it flowed a dowager aunt, her fan fluttering like moth wings, drawing Jasmine aside to share tales of her own arranged courtship in the roaring 20s, love blooming late like asters in October. "We learned to water the weeds, dear," the woman confided, her gaze twinkling over a flute of elderflower cordial. "Sometimes they root deepest." Jasmine laughed softly, the sound a ripple in the crystal's chime, and for a moment the room felt less like a stage and more like a salon of shared solitudes. Then Victoria glided in a vision in crimson taffeta that pooled like spilled wine, her blonde waves pinned with heirloom combs that caught the light like accusations. At 39, she carried the patina of Hampton's summers and Harvard MBAs, her beauty undimmed but edged with the frost of ambitions unmet. Her eyes pale as winter birch found Alexander across the throng, and she approached with the precision of a debutante's curtsy, a manicured hand extending like a gauntlet. "Alexander, my dear," she purred, voice pitched to carry over the violins, her touch lingering on his sleeve, a beat too long. "How domesticated you look, and this must be the catalyst for change." Her gaze slid to Jasmine, cool as a draft from an ill-sealed pane, appraising the velvet gown, the pearls, the unadorned ebony skin. "Exotic, isn't she? A touch of the unexpected in your otherwise impeccable portfolio." The words landed not as thunder, but as sleet, sharp, insidious, drawing a ripple of titters from the cluster of matrons orbiting Victoria, like moons to a haughty planet. One, a widow, whose estates spanned the vineyard, leaned in with a conspiratorial whisper. Darling velvets, so earthy. One imagines it suits a bohemian merger. Another, her diamonds straining against a corseted bodice, added, and those pearls family, I presume. How quaint in a sea of Cartier. The laughter spread brittle as thin ice eyes darting to Jasmine like spectators at a subtle execution. She stood rooted bouquet of calla lilies, clutched in one hand, stems hiding her sketchbook's edge, her breath steady but her pulse a quiet drum. Hold the line echoed her father's voice from hospital. Hushed tones, words are wind. Character is the oak. She met Victoria's stare with a serenity forged in Brooklyn basements, where debates over rights and rhythms had taught her that silence could be a symphony's crescendo. Alexander froze beside her, his frame taut as bowstring, the old script, unspooling in his mind, deflect, don't engage. Alliances over altercations. Victoria's barb was familiar territory, her wit a weapon wielded in their shared past, when she'd mocked competitors over martinis at 21 Club, her laughter a shield for insecurities he'd once overlooked. But this was different. This struck at the woman beside him, the one whose tea had warmed his rain-chilled bones, whose words at the plaza had turned skeptics to allies. His lips parted, a defense forming Victoria that's uncalled for, but it died, unspoken pride's chain yanking it back. The moment stretched elastic, as taffy the quartet's strings sawing into the void. Jasmine felt it like a chill seeping through seams, not just the mockery, but his silence, a permission granted by omission. Her cheeks warmed, not with shame, but with the sting of solitude renewed, the echo of vigils alone, of rings worn for ghosts, while the living looked away. She excused herself with a murmur of the powder room. Gliding through the press, like smoke through fingers, her path, a deliberate arc away from the venom's core. In the garden terrace beyond the French doors, the night air wrapped her like a shawl, crisp with the scent of turned earth and distant wood smoke from rooftop chimneys. Moonlight silvered the balustrade, casting her shadow long and lone across the flagstones. She sank onto a wrought iron bench, its chill biting through velvet, and opened the sketchbook with hands that trembled now unchecked. Pencil met page in furious grace. The ballroom rendered not in splendor, but in shards. Chandeliers fractured into barbs. Faces blurred into masks of malice. A lone figure at the center, unbowed, but unheld. Tears blurred the lines, salt tracing paths down her cheeks, like rain on window panes, aught sobs, but silent rivers carving canyons in composure, long held. Footsteps on gravel announced him. Before his voice did the terrace door creaking like a confessional hinge. Alexander emerged from the shadows, his bow tie loosened face etched with the regret of roads not taken. Jasmine. He began, low, as a prayer, stepping into the moonlight's unforgiving gaze. She closed the book sharply, rising to meet him. Her eyes dark pools reflecting starlight, holding a sorrow polished by years of quiet endurance. You said nothing, she stated, not accusation, but fact, voice, steady as a hymn's bridge. You let them carve me with words, as if I were a footnote in your fine print. Do you know what that carves in a woman? Not wounds, Alexander echoes, of being seen but not shielded, loved in theory, but left to the wind. He reached for her arm, then faltered, hand falling like a leaf in autumn's sigh. Guilt coiled in his chest, heavy, as the merger's ledger's visions, colliding Victoria's triumphant smile, Jasmine's graceful parry at the luncheon, the umbrella's shelter on that stormy portico. I froze. He admitted the words raw as peeled bark. Old habits deflect the storm, don't dance in it. But you, God. Jasmine, you're no footnote. You're the spine of this story I didn't know I was writing. She searched his face, the lines there etched by boardroom battles and buried bereavements, mirroring her own map of maturity, the quiet wisdom of those who'd outlived illusions. Then rewrite it, she whispered, stepping past him, gown brushing stone like a farewell sigh. Because echoes fade but silence, it builds walls even oaks can't breach. As she vanished into the ballroom's glow, Alexander remained, fists clenched against the balustrade, the night's chill seeping into his bones. Victoria's laughter drifted out like a mocking coda, but it was Jasmine's retreating form that haunted him, a silhouette of strength he'd failed to frame. For the first time, the empire's weight felt hollow, a throne built on contracts, while true legacies bloomed in the uncelebrated gardens of the heart. Dawn would bring apologies unspoken, but tonight regret rooted deep, promising a harvest of change if he had the courage to tend it. The days following the gala draped the Harrington estate in a hush, as profound as fresh fallen snow, each footfall on the Persian runners, echoing like a withheld confession. Jasmine moved through the rooms with the deliberate grace of autumn leaves, drifting from branch to earth, present yet poised for departure. Her sketchbook, a constant companion, clutched like a shield against the chill that had settled anew between her and Alexander. She poured her mornings into the conservatory, where the hyacinths she'd coaxed from bulbs now bowed under their own weight, petals bruised purple as regrets unspoken. Afternoons blurred into consultations with Elena over herbal infusions, chamomile laced with lavender from Marcus's clippings, a ritual that knit the staff's quiet loyalties tighter, their shared glances, a tapestry of empathy woven from years of serving fortunes that overlooked the hands that sustained them. Evenings found her in the library, pencil, tracing not bridges now, but labyrinths, winding paths of ink where figures stood at thresholds, one hand extended, the other withdrawing. Alexander, for his part, navigated the silence like a man charting fog-shrouded waters, his study a refuge of flickering screens and half-drafted memos that blurred under the weight of self-reproach. The merger advanced, signatures inked on the Ellis Archive's Salvation, a Harlem wing, rising in renderings that promised cultural bridges over economic divides. But victory tasted of ash. Victoria's parting barb echoed in his quieter hours, a venom that had slithered past his defenses, leaving Jasmine's parting words to fester. Silence builds walls even oaks can't breach. He caught glimpses of her through half-open doors, the curve of her neck as she read by the solarium's slant of light, the faint furrow of her brow over a page, her fingers adorned with that silver ring's unyielding gleam, pausing to trace a line as if mapping escapes. Guilt rooted in him like the estate's ancient oaks, twisting deeper with each evaded apology, each breakfast, where his "good morning" hung unanswered in the air between them. At night, alone in his slate-gray chamber, he replayed the terrace scene, her eyes polished, onyx reflecting moonlight's mercy, holding not fury, but a sorrow that mirrored his own buried losses. The mother's warmth eclipsed by empire, the father's edicts that equated love with leverage. The charity auction at the Javits Center loomed like a storm front on the horizon, its promise of glamour a thin veneer over the societal scrutiny it inevitably summoned. Sponsored by the Harrington Foundation, it aimed to fund literacy programs in underserved boroughs, a cause Jasmine had quietly championed, slipping manuscripts from her family's imprint into the silent bid sheets for underprivileged schools. Attendance was non-negotiable. The event a showcase for the merger's benevolent face, and so they arrived side by side in the lengthening shadows of the West Side Highway. The limousine's leather seats a confessional neither dared enter. Jasmine wore a gown of deep sapphire silk, its bodice embroidered with subtle vines that echoed her rings, etching a nod to growth amid thorns. Her hair swept into a loose chignon that framed the elegant planes of her face. No veil, no armor beyond the pearls at her throat, yet the rumors clung like dew whispers in page 6 columns, branding her, the shadow bride, a plain consort, unfit for Harrington Heights. Alexander, in midnight tuxedo, offered his arm, with a formality softened by the faint tremor in his grip. His cologne, bergamot, and sandalwood mingling with her jasmine oil in the close air of the car. "It'll be brief," he ventured, echoing his wedding night platitude. She turned her gaze steady as the Hudson's undercurrent. "Brevity, Alexander, is for contracts. Hearts demand the full measure." The Javits Center thrummed with the pulse of privilege. Vast halls under glass vaults that arched like frozen waves. Auction paddles fluttering amid air, scented with orchids and ambition. Tables draped in ivory linen groaned under crystal flutes of Veuve Clicquot, and canapes of smoked salmon on blini. The hum of conversation, a symphony laced with subtext. Guests, silver-thatched philanthropists from the Whitney board, their spouses' gowns whispering of atelier fittings. Young tech scions with eyes on legacies yet unearned milled about the display cases where lots gleamed, a Basquiat sketch, evoking Harlem's raw poetry, a first edition Hurston that Jasmine's fingers itched to touch. She and Alexander took their seats at the Harrington table, a strategic perch near the podium, her posture regal beside his, though the space between them felt as vast as the center's atrium. Bids rose like tides. 200,000 for the Warhol screen print, the auctioneer's gavel a metronome, marking time's inexorable march. The pause for dinner brought no respite, the hall's energy coiling tighter as waitstaff glided with silver-domed entrees of seared foie and heirloom carrots, glazed in balsamic reduction. Victoria materialized then, a specter in gown of liquid mercury that caught the spotlights like a blade's edge, her approach flanked by a coterie of society's stalwarts widows, whose estates dotted the Gold Coast, their fans a flutter of veiled judgments. She paused at their table flute, raised in mocking benediction, her smile a crescent moon of calculated cruelty. "Alexander, how generous of you to share the spotlight." And Jasmine, still playing, the enigmatic muse, one tires of the charade. Her voice pitched higher, carrying to adjacent tables like ripples on a still pond. "Come now, darling, enough with the shadows. Show us the real you. The plain little thing from Brooklyn, the black bride who snagged a Harrington by default. Or is that why you linger in the wings, afraid the light might reveal the mismatch?" The words cascaded a deluge of disdain that drew gasps like indrawn breaths before a storm. Heads, swiveled forks, suspended mid-air, the hall's murmur swelling to a susurrus of scandal. Did she say that? The nerve Jasmine's hand tightened on her napkin, the linen crumpling like fragile resolve, her chest a vice of remembered slights. The publishing world's polite rejections, her father's hospital whispers of, "Hold fast, girl, they're just noise." Heat rose in her cheeks, not shame, but the burn of isolation renewed the silver ring on her finger, a cool anchor amid the tide. She met Victoria's gaze, lips parting for a retort forged in dignity's fire. "Beauty isn't borrowed, Victoria. It's earned in the quiet hours you scorn," but the words caught vulnerability, a thief in the throat. Before the venom could deepen its hold, Alexander rose. not with the measured ascent of boardroom poise, but a surge like thunder, breaking drought. He positioned himself between them, broad shoulders, a bulwark against the room's prying eyes, his voice rolling out like the Hudson in spate. Enough, Victoria. You've sharpened your tongue on lesser prey, but not here. Not on my wife. The hall stilled, the auctioneer's distant patter fading to irrelevance, 100 gazes pinning him in place. Victoria's laugh tinkled brittle as spun sugar. Alexander, defend the dowdy, how quixotic. She's extraordinary. He interjected, tone unyielding as granite, yet laced with a tenderness that cracked the air. Jasmine carries a grace you've mistaken for shadow, a strength that silences storms without a shout. Her silence isn't weakness. It's the quiet of ancient rivers, carving canyons of women who've mended worlds with whispers, while you chased echoes in empty halls. He turned to Jasmine, then his hand extending not in obligation, but in offering, a palm upturned steady as the vows he'd once recited by rote. The room held its collective breath as he drew her to her feet, his free hand brushing a stray curl from her temple, a gesture intimate as dawn's first light. Look at her, he commanded softly, yet loud enough to reclaim the space, his eyes locking on hers with a fervor that stripped pretense bare. See the fire in those eyes, the lines of laughter etched by lives fully lived, the skin that glows like Earth's richest loam, radiant, resilient, real. Not the caricature you peddled, Victoria, but a woman whose beauty blooms from within, untarnished by your petty prisms. Gasps rippled outward, the crowd's alchemy, swift whispers of awe, supplanting scandal, matrons exchanging glances of dawning respect, the Basquiat bidder, a gallery owner from Soho leaning forward with newfound intrigue. Victoria's facade fractured, her cheeks paling to ash beneath the mercury sheen, the flute slipping from fingers gone slack. Jasmine stood transfixed, Alexander's words a balm on wounds long salved, but never scarred, over her hand in his, a bridge finally crossed. Tears pricked her eyes, not of fragility, but released the weight of solitary stands, lifting like fog, burned by sun. For the first time since the cathedral's cold arches, she felt not appended, but anchored, seen in her fullness, the ebony elegance of her features, the curve of her smile that promised stories deeper than any auction lot. He drew her closer, voice dropping to a timbre, meant for her alone, yet carrying like a vow renewed. No more shadows, Jasmine. You're my choice, not merger's mandate, but heart's horizon. And I'll stand sentinel every gale, every glare. The hall erupted then, not in chaos, but crescendo applause, tentative at first, swelling to a tide that washed Victoria's retreat in its wake, her gown trailing like a vanquished flag. Jasmine's breath steadied her free hand, rising to cup his cheek, thumb tracing the silver at his temple, a mirror to her ring's patina marks of time's tender etchings. In that suspended heartbeat amid the crystal's chime and the crowd's murmur of metamorphosis, Alexander felt the scales tip love, not as thunderclap, but as hearth's steady glow kindled not by her unveiled grace, but the unyielding spirit that had endured his blindness. The auction resumed, bids soaring higher. But for them, the true lot had been claimed, a partnership forged in defense, blooming toward the light of tomorrow's unchained. The limousine sliced through the Javits Center's afterglow like a shadow reclaiming the night, its tinted windows veiling the city's neon pulse from the charged cocoon within. Alexander and Jasmine sat, not side by side, but angled toward each other across the leather expanse, the space between them humming with the residue of revelation. The auction's applause still echoing in their ears like a tide receding from high water. Outside, Manhattan's canyons blurred into streaks of gold and garnet rain-slicked streets, reflecting the underbelly of ambition. But inside, the air held the weight of words, finally spoken gestures long withheld. Jasmine's sapphire gown pooled around her, like midnight spilled her fingers, tracing idle patterns on the armrest, the silver ring catching faint glimmers from passing headlights. Alexander watched her profile, the elegant arch of her neck, the subtle play of light on her skin. Ebony warmed to mahogany by the evening's fire, and felt the chasm of his earlier silences yawn wider, demanding bridgework of a soul-deep kind. He broke the hush, first voice low as the engines purr. "That wasn't theater back there, Jasmine. Not for the crowd, not for the headlines." She turned, then, her eyes those onyx depths that had first unsettled him in the cathedral's half-light, holding his with a scrutiny softened by the vulnerability of the unveiled. No tears now, but the faint sheen of them lingered like dew on petals after a gale. Then what was it Alexander, a ledger balanced, a debt repaid for the tea on rainy nights? Her tone carried no bite, only the quiet inquiry of a woman who'd mended more fractures than she'd confessed her father's fading grip in sterile hospital corridors, the publishing world's doors ajar, but never fully swung, others lost to life's inexorable drafts. It was the voice of those who'd learned that apologies, like heirloom linens, required careful unfolding to reveal their weave. The estate's gates parted with a hydraulic sigh as they approached the gravel drive, crunching under tires like bones settling into place. They entered through the side portico, away from the grandeur of the foyer, the air inside redolent of beeswax and the faint, comforting tang of Elena's late-night baking oatmeal lace cookies cooling on wire racks, a solace for insomniac hours. Alexander paused in the butler's pantry, shedding his overcoat with hands that betrayed a faint tremor, the fabric heavy with the night's absorbed tensions. "Walk with me," he said, not command but entreaty, gesturing toward the library's arched threshold. Jasmine hesitated her heels, simple pumps of supple leather chosen for their whisper over the auction's clamor, echoing softly as she followed. The room enveloped them like an old embrace, walls lined with volumes whose spines held the patina of hands long gone, a fire crackling in the grate with the steady companionship of embers casting their shadows long and intertwined on the Aubusson rug. She settled into the wing chair by the hearth, its velvet worn to a hush at the arm's sketchbook balanced on her knee like a talisman. Alexander did not sit. Instead, he paced to the mantel, fingers trailing the cool marble where a silver frame held his parents' wedding portrait. His mother radiant in lace, his father stern, even in joy, a union of convenience that had flowered late into something resembling grace. It was neither debt nor drama. He began, turning to face her, the firelight gilding the silver at his temples like threads of earned wisdom. It was seeing you truly for the first time, not through the fog of contracts or the haze of my own fears. Victoria's words, they weren't just barbs at you. They echoed every dismissal I'd let slide in my life. My mother's dreams shelved for the boardroom, my own hesitations dressed as strategy. I stood silent before because I was blind, Jasmine, not to you, but to the man I could be beside you. His voice cracked on the edge of confession, a fissure in the armor forged from years of solitary ascents. Summers at the Cape, where he'd built sandcastles, only to watch tides claim them. Winters in the study poring over ledgers, while the house echoed empty. Jasmine closed her sketchbook softly, the leather cover sighing shut, and rose to meet him at the mantel, her presence a counterpoint to the fire's flicker. Blindness isn't the sin, Alexander. It's the refusal to seek the light once the veil lifts. She reached for the frame, her fingers brushing his in the act, a contact electric as the auction's applause, yet intimate as dawn's hush. My Elias E. on this ring, he taught me that. A community organizer in Harlem, gone too soon to a rally's stray bullet, but his love was a lantern steady, illuminating the fractures without shattering them. I wore this not as anchor, but as reminder that love asks for sight, not perfection. And tonight, when you stepped forward, I saw you choose to look. The admission hung between them, fragile as the ash sifting from the grate, and Alexander covered her hand with his, the warmth of her palm seeping into his like roots finding soil after drought. Then let me earn that sight day by shadowed day. No grand gestures scripted for spotlights, just the quiet hours, if you'll share them. She searched his face, the lines there, a topography of trials weathered the faint scar above his brow, from a boyhood fall from the estate's oak, the deepening furrows from sleepless nights, tallying empires against emptier ledgers. It was a map she recognized, akin to her own crow's feet from laughter at family reunions in Prospect Park, the subtle groove at her mouth from holding back truths too tender for the world's coarse weave. For women like her, and those listening in the soft glow of bedside lamps, nursing memories of marriages mended over decades, this was the heart's true cadence. Not fireworks, but the steady pulse of persistence. In the days that unfurled, like the conservatory's first crocuses, tentative blooms pushing through frost, their rhythm shifted incremental as the turning of seasons. Mornings in the breakfast parlor stretched beyond the journal's headlines. Alexander lingered over his espresso, asking not perfunctorily, but with the curiosity of a man awakening to color. That sketch from last night, the labyrinth, does it end in convergence or choice? Jasmine would unfold the page, her voice weaving the tail paths, inspired by Walker's color purple, where separations led not to solitudes but symphonies of self. Afternoons brought him to the gardens, sleeves rolled against the crisp air, kneeling beside Marcus to turn soil for the spring, planting, his hands manicured for handshakes, now dusted with loam, learning the patience of bulbs that promised violet and gold. Roots first, Marcus advised his Carolina drawl, a balm, then the reaching. Jasmine watched from the terrace, sketchbook in lap, capturing not the labor, but the light in Alexander's eyes, the unguarded wonder of a man rediscovering the earth's quiet rebellions. Evenings wove them closer, the library, their unspoken sanctum. One twilight, as rain pattered against the panes, like hesitant fingers, Jasmine opened her sketchbook to the auction's echo, a figure unveiled under spotlights, another shielding with outstretched arms. "Your defense," she murmured, pencil pausing. It wasn't just words. It was a door cracked to trust, perhaps. Alexander leaned over her shoulder, his breath warm on her neck, tracing the lines with a fingertip, calloused now from garden trowels. "And this?" he asked, pointing to the shadowed form beside her own, a silhouette with silvered temples, hand extended, not in possession, but partnership. "That's us if we dare the draft." He pulled a stool close. Accepting the pencil, she offered his strokes, tentative at first, blocky attempts at the gown's folds, then softening into something akin to reverence. Laughter bubbled, then low and shared, as his lines veered comically awry, her corrections a dance of guidance and grace. In that imperfect rendering amid eraser shavings like fallen leaves, they found the first true measure of communion, not flawless, but felt. The world beyond the estate's walls tested these tendrils, as thorns will a new rose. Whispers in Vanity Fair's society pages spun the auction as Harrington's dramatic defense, But undercurrents lingered. Victoria's allies, murmuring of pity plays at brunches in the village. Her emails to Alexander, a barrage of veiled barbs. Careful, darling. Chivalry's a poor investment. He deleted them unread, forwarding one to his counsel for a cease and desist, etched in legalese, as unyielding as his resolve. At a board meeting in the Seagram building, where cigar smoke curled like old grudges, a director's jest about the merger's muse drew his rebuke, not thunder, but the quiet thunder of conviction. My wife is the merger's sole gentleman. Dismiss her at your peril. The room shifted chairs, scraping like concessions, and word rippled outward, reshaping narratives, from novelty to necessity. Yet it was in the unscripted moments that trust took root deepest. One Sunday, as frost silvered the estate's lawns, Jasmine led him to the solarium, where Elena's cookies waited beside a pot of her grandmother's chicory brew, bittersweet, a taste of Creole mornings in the 9th Ward. They spoke then of Elias, his laugh, like summer thunder, the letters he'd penned from marches, folded now in her sketchbook's back pages. Alexander shared his own ghosts, his mother's unpublished poems tucked in attic trunks, dreams deferred for duty's call. We carry them not as burdens, she said, her hand finding his across the wicker table, but as lanterns for the path ahead. He nodded, the ring on her finger, brushing his skin like a vow renewed, and in that touch, the parallel lines of their early days converged, not in collision, but in the gentle arc of orbits aligning. As November's chill deepened, the estate no longer echoed with isolation's hollow ring. Instead, it hummed with the subtle symphony of becoming fireplaces crackling against drafts, gardens promising bloom beneath the mulch, two souls sketching their way toward a horizon where contracts yielded to choices and love, like the crocuses emerged, not despite the frost, but through it. For Alexander and Jasmine, the unveiling had been no mere spectacle. It was the quiet revolution of hearts learning to hold one petal, one promise at a time. December's mantle settled over Manhattan like a lace shawl, intricate and forgiving, frosting the estate's leaded windows with fern-like patterns that caught the low winter sun in prisms of quiet promise. 4 months since the cathedral's obligatory vows, and the Harrington home, no longer merely an estate, but a hearth woven from tentative threads, breathed with the rhythm of rediscovery. Jasmine moved through its rooms with the ease of roots, finding familiar soil, her sketchbook, now a shared ledger, pages filled, not just with solitary bridges, but duets of line and shadow. Alexander's improving strokes alongside hers, capturing the curve of a shared coffee mug or the arc of her hand in his during twilight walks along the East River's edge. The conservatory bloomed defiantly against the chill hyacinths, giving way to paper whites, their scent a humble incense rising from bulbs they'd planted together, fingers entwined in the damp earth. Laughter bubbling as clods of soil dusted their sleeves like confetti from an unscripted celebration. Alexander, once a silhouette of starched precision, had softened at the edges, his mornings, no longer eclipsed by the journal's demands, but lingered over with the ritual of chicory brew and her stories. Tales of Elias's marches, now laced with visions of their own quiet rebellions. A donation drive for Ellis Echo's literacy pods in Bronx classrooms, where children pored over Baldwin like maps to undiscovered countries. Evenings in the library unfolded like well-worn letters, the fire's glow gilding their faces as he read aloud from his mother's attic-discovered poems. Verses of Cape Cod tides and deferred dreams, his voice cracking on lines that echoed her own losses. She saw the world in fragments, he'd murmur, closing the volume, his hand seeking hers across the leather ottoman. But you mend them whole." Jasmine would lean into him, then her head on his shoulder, the silver ring brushing his knuckles like a benediction. Its vines no longer a solitary sentinel, but a bridge to tomorrows they sketched in tandem. Yet the merger's shadow, though faded, lingered in the ledgers. Victoria's final salvo arrived via courier one slate-gray afternoon, a glossy dossier of doctored whispers, anonymous sources, peddling tales of Jasmine's opportunism, laced with veiled slurs that dredged the old ugliness from the mud. Alexander met it in the study, the package unopened on his desk, like a Pandora's relic, until Jasmine entered with a tray of elderberry tea, her grandmother's remedy for winter's bite. She saw the seal, paused, then slid it aside with the grace of one who'd faced fiercer gales. "Burn it," she said, simply pouring the steaming liquid into porcelain cups, etched with forget-me-nots. "We've outgrown their ink." He did that night in the garden pit, where Marcus burned autumn's leavings, the flames devouring the pages in a ballet of sparks, Victoria's empire of envy reduced to ash that fertilized the roses they'd planted come spring. In the fire's afterglow, Alexander drew her close, his lips brushing her temple. "No more ghosts between us, only us." Her answer was a kiss, soft as snowfall sealing the pyre's promise. As solstice neared, the air hummed with unspoken ceremony. The estate's staff, Elena, with her knowing smiles, Marcus with clippings of evergreens for the mantle, sensing the shift like birds before migration. It began with a simple envelope on Jasmine's vanity, a single sheet of vellum, Alexander's script, precise, yet tender, inviting her to St. Patrick's once more, not under obligation's weight, but choice's wing. No contracts this time. It read only the vow I should have spoken from the heart, to see you hold, you grow with you, in all the seasons we have left. Tears blurred the ink, not of sorrow, but the sweet release of winter's thawed, and she replied in kind, not words, but a sketch. The cathedral doors flung wide, sunlight streaming through like grace unearned, two figures stepping forth hand in hand, their shadows merging into one. The morning dawned crystalline, the city a canvas of blue skies, etched with bare-branched sentinels. St. Patrick's spires piercing the heavens, like fingers steepled in prayer. No paparazzi cordons this time, no whispers coiled in the pews. Instead, a gathering intimate as a family rosary. Elena and Marcus in the front row, their hands clasped like old vines. A handful of Elliskin from Harlem brownstones, their faces lined with the quiet triumph of legacies reclaimed. Alexander's aunt, the dowager from the gala, her fans stilled in approval. Jasmine descended the limo in a gown of ivory chiffon, its lines flowing like the Hudson at peace, simple self-stitched in the alcove hours, embroidered with silver vines that twined her ring's echo up the sleeves. No veil obscured her now. Her hair fell in loose waves crowned with a single white calla lily, her skin radiant under the stained glass kaleidoscope pearls at her throat, winking like stars reclaimed from night. Alexander waited at the altar tuxedo, midnight blue to match her sapphire from the auction. His eyes, those piercing blues softened by months of mending, never leaving her, as the organ swelled with Bach's Jesu joy of man's desiring a melody that wove through the arches like threads of fate rewoven. She walked the aisle alone, not in isolation, but sovereignty. Each step a reclamation of the girl from Brooklyn basements who'd dreamed in margins, the widow who'd worn grief like grace, the artist whose lines had bridged chasms wider than Fifth Avenue's divides. At the chancel he took her hands, calloused now from shared gardens, and the priest elderly, with a voice like rum-warmed honey, began anew. Dearly beloved. But it was Alexander's vows that hushed the vaulted space, his words unscripted, rising like smoke from a hearth long cold. Jasmine Ellis Harrington. I entered our life as a stranger, in a storm, blind to the light you carried. But you taught me sight, not the glare of spotlights, but the steady glow of souls intertwined. I vowed to cherish your fire, your quiet rebellions, the stories in your sketches, and the silences we share. In frailty and fortitude, in winters and blooms, I choose you not as merger, but as my horizon, my home. Tears traced her cheeks, diamonds finer than any Cartier, as she responded, voice a melody of southern soil and city steel. Alexander, you saw me veiled and chose to unveil, not with force but faith. I vow to walk your paths, to mend your fractures with my lines, to hold your ghosts as gently as you hold mine. In the ordinary miracles, the rain we shelter from the soil, we turn together. I choose you, fully, freely, forever. Rings exchanged, not heirlooms of obligation, but simple bands of platinum, etched with intertwined vines, slid onto fingers that trembled with the weight of joy earned. The kiss that followed was no performance, but a sealing lips, meeting soft as petals, unfurling the congregation's applause. A gentle wave, Elena dabbing her eyes with a lace hanky. Marcus nodding as if to say, roots held true. They emerged into sunlight that spilled across Fifth Avenue like liquid gold, the cathedral doors framing them in a halo of hard-won radiance. No limousine this time, but a stroll hand in hand to the plaza's fountain, where pennies tossed by lovers past danced in the spray. Jasmine opened her sketchbook on a wrought iron bench, the final page, blank no more. Two figures beneath open arches, shadows as one, the skyline beyond a canvas of possibilities. Alexander leaned in, his breath warm on her ear. Our masterpiece. She closed it with a smile, tucking it into the curve of his arm, and they wandered on to a penthouse overlooking the Hudson they'd claimed as theirs, walls soon to echo with laughter. Not ledgers. Shelves for her manuscripts beside his blueprints, a garden balcony for roses that would bloom come spring. In the years that followed, their story rippled outward. Ellis Echoes thriving under joint stewardship galas, where Jasmine's curations drew crowds, not for spectacle, but substance, panels on love's quiet architectures from Hurston's hearths to modern mergers of hearts. Victoria faded to footnotes, her barbs blunted by time's indifferent tide, while whispers turned to wisdom tales of the Harrington unveiling, a testament to graces grown late like wine from forgotten cellars. For Alexander and Jasmine, age brought no diminishment, but deepening silver threading her waves, as it did his temples, hands, more veined, but no less entwined evenings by the fire, trading sketches of grandchildren's first steps, legacies sketched in love's indelible ink. And you, dear listener, perhaps cradling this tale in the hush of your own hearth, where memories flicker like embers, in a well-tended great pause now, in this season of turning, and reach for your own sketchbook, be it paper or the quiet ledger of your heart. What door have you left ajar, waiting for light? Whom might you choose anew with vows unspoken, but felt in the marrow? Step toward it today, a call to a long-lost friend, a letter to the self you set aside for storms long past. For in the art of loving late, as Jasmine and Alexander discovered, every unveiling is a beginning, every choice a bloom that defies the frost. Let yours unfold. The sunlight is waiting.